After years of close political and economic ties, relations between the US and Saudi Arabia seem to be in trouble. The Saudis are angered by Washington's recent policies on Syria and Iran. Is this a mere spat or the beginning of the end of a special relationship forged in the last days of World War II? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. It's a crucial US ally in the region, but the long-time friendship between Saudi Arabia and the US is now under pressure. Diplomatic sources say Saudi's intelligence chief, Prince Bandar bin Sultan, is speaking about his country making a major shift in its relationship with the United States. He's quoted as sharply criticizing US policies on Syria and Iran, as well as condemning its apparent lack of urgency on the Palestinian-Israeli track. The deepening rift was acknowledged by Secretary of State John Kerry. Speaking to reporters in London on Wednesday, he said, "We know that the Saudis were obviously disappointed the Syria strike didn't take place. It's our obligation to work closely with them, as I am doing." But he went on to say that, "I think there is a clear understanding in our relationship going forward, and I have great confidence that the United States and Saudi Arabia will continue to be the close and important friends and allies that we have been." So why is the kingdom apparently reassessing its relations with the US? Going back to 2011, the Saudis were then angered by US criticism of the crackdown on anti-government protests in Bahrain. As we mentioned earlier, the Saudis are also upset about a lack of US military action in Syria. The country cancelled a speech at the UN General Assembly last month and rejected a seat on the Security Council recently, citing international double standards on the Middle East as the reason. And the recent warming of relations between the US and Iran has also outraged Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is seen as a pivotal anchor to US interests in the Middle East, and for decades has nurtured ties primarily based on mutual oil and security interests. Historians refer to a meeting between King Abdulaziz and President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1945 as securing what is called the special relationship. That relationship continued throughout the Cold War, with Saudi Arabia backing the US fight against communism. Saudi Arabia's 1973 oil embargo on the US put a strain on the relationship. But the kingdom later stepped in to fill the global oil shortage when war broke out between its neighbors Iraq and Iran, a policy that was coordinated with the US. More recently, though, 9/11 and the fact that many of the attackers were of Saudi origin seriously damaged the kingdom's image in the United States. But shared concerns about armed groups such as Al-Qaeda and Iran's regional ambitions have provided what's been called a renewed logic for their strategic partnership. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our three guests. From New York, Richard Murphy, a former US ambassador to Syria and Saudi Arabia. From Jeddah, Hussein Shibokshi, columnist at Asharq Al-Awsat, an international Arabic newspaper. And joining us on Skype from Vermont, Greg Gause, professor of political science at the University of Vermont. He's also the author of Saudi Arabia in the New Middle East. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Hussein Shibokshi. There's been no official confirmation of any kind about Prince Bandar's comments. To what extent is this, or could this be, official thinking?
I don't think there is such a thing, frankly, because I am judging with what has taken place yesterday in London between Saud al-Faisal, the Saudi foreign minister, and John Kerry, the Secretary of State from the United States. There was a mutual understanding, a joint communique issued, agreement on what is to be done vis-a-vis Syria. No comments or even denial to give this story any credit was taking place as far as the Saudi government is concerned. So I am not going to give this story a credibility. However, it does not change the fact that there are some issues where the two governments do not see eye to eye necessarily. So there is some dialogue taking place and some blunt discussions taking place on various issues: Iran, Egypt, and Syria, amongst many others.
Well, Richard Murphy, there does appear to be a strain, an immense strain, in the relationship between the countries, is there not?
Well, we've had our differences over the years, but in recent times, I think the coming together of the Arab Spring, the upheavals in Egypt, this uncertain position as they saw the American position on the Brotherhood, the Syrian situation with the strike, no strike, waverings on America's part, but above all, their concern about Iran. That sort of knits them all together. And when the Egyptian President Morsi went to Tehran, that really blackened his image in Saudi Arabia, Saudi official circles at least.
Well, Greg Gores, your view about how serious this dispute, this delicate diplomatic dispute between Saudi Arabia and the US?
I do think that there are real differences of opinion, as Ambassador Murphy said, on important issues like Syria and Egypt. I do think that the core of the relationship, which has always been about security in the Gulf region, is still there and still intact. Saudis worry about the American talks with Iran, but I think that some of those fears are exaggerated. I don't think the United States is going to be turning over the keys to Gulf security to Iran anytime soon. So I don't want to downplay the seriousness of the issues, but there have always been differences of opinion between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. on regional issues. But on the core issue of Persian Gulf security, it seems to me that we're still on the same page.
Well, Hussein Shabakshi, taking your points about no official confirmation of these particular comments and the whole thing perhaps being overstated, yet some observers do point out that a few weeks ago, Prince Bandar's predecessor as head of intelligence, Prince Turki Al-Faisal, also made scathing comments about the Obama administration. He accused it publicly of dithering, was his word, on the Syrian issue and in particular on the Israeli-Palestinian track. Now, these are strong comments, and coming so quickly on the heels of each other, it has given rise to speculation that some message is being passed.
Not necessarily, because this opinion is not only some Saudi opinion, if it was the case, but it's also almost a universal opinion, because these have been voiced in the United States itself amongst senators and congressmen, as well as public opinion makers in the West, UK, France, and what have you. It is a serious issue. And as far as the Palestinian-Israeli matter is concerned, I don't think there are any hopeful or optimistic Saudis, let alone Arabs anymore, who do believe that there is a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian crisis anytime soon. Israel is given the hand to do whatever it wants in that part of the world, and it is continuously annexing the land, so there will be no two-state solution. We're not kidding ourselves. But the Syrian issue was definitely a breaker, because the buildup was so high, the red line, the chemical weapons, the warning that was taking place, all of this was a letdown when nothing was happening to Assad vis-a-vis a punishment. Yes, there is a deal in the making to take away from him the weapons, but he got away with murder, and that's a very troubling message. It surely sends a welcoming message to the appetite of the Iranians or the North Koreans or the Cubans that you can't get away with murder, we're not going to chase you anymore.
Well, we'll get back to the specific Iranian issue in a minute, but I'd like to go to Ambassador Murphy with once again the point about the source, the diplomatic source of the speculation. It was Prince Bandar bin Sultan. Now, this is somebody who for 22 years was the ambassador to the US. He was somebody with whom you, Ambassador Murphy, had many dealings throughout the years. Some have said that the source of these diplomatic speculation is in itself a very subtle message being passed to the US administration. Do you think there's any credibility in that?
I wouldn't call it very subtle. I don't think Prince Bandar was at all subtle in his words. As I tried to interpret the harshness of the statement, personally, I think it was an effort to send a message inside Syria to the rebels that we are challenging. We who have been considered such loyal allies of the Americans, we disagree flatly with their policies. We're challenging it, and you're going to get more assistance, more support. I think they're very worried in Riyadh, as are many in Washington, about the divisions within the rebel ranks and the relatively increasing weakness of their position inside Syria.
Well, Greg Gores, this issue of Syria, you mentioned, of course, the whole issue of Iran. Do we have a situation here where the one is playing off the other? The fact that these are mentioned together as points of concern indicate that they are, in many ways, inextricably linked, are they not?
Oh, they're certainly linked. I mean, the Iranian involvement in Syria is absolutely clear. But I think that the core of the difference here is that the United States just doesn't see Syria as being as important as Saudi Arabia does. And that's understandable. And it seems to me that the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia has always had these tensions and differences on regional issues, Arab-Israeli issues, as Hussein pointed out, and now on the post-Arab Spring issues, as Ambassador Murphy pointed out. But I think that the misunderstanding here is that the U.S.-Saudi relationship depends upon complete agreement on these things. I don't think that agreement has ever been there. This is a serious test of the relationship, but I don't think it gets to the core concern of the mutual security interests that the two have in the Gulf region. It's an important issue, but I don't think it's an issue that leads to a divorce.
Well, Hussein Shabakshi, an interesting comment there from Greg Gores that perhaps the United States does not view Syria as seriously as Saudi Arabia does. Your view on that?
I think Greg has an important point to be discussed here. It's not the issue of Syria alone. Frankly, I think the United States is disengaging slowly from the entire area, from the entire Middle East. It is shifting access towards the Far East, the Pacific. It is no longer as interested as it used to be. It is sending serious messages, not so subtle anymore, that it frankly does not have enough stamina or tolerance to the complications that are Middle Eastern politics. Oil is no longer as vital of an issue as it used to be with the new discoveries of fracking technology that is allowing shale gas to be exported and frankly strengthening the position of America again in that particular domain. Also, it is just frankly troublesome. This part of the world has been just a big headache, and not enough progress has been made with the different parties, particularly after the Arab Spring, where it was painted as a rosy turning point. Probably the new Berlin Wall to the Obama administration, they were marketing this in close circles in Washington that this is Obama's Berlin Wall, the Arab Spring, and it turned out to be a very ugly episode.
Well, Ambassador Murphy, there we heard the comment that the U.S. could be shifting its access in terms of its national cares. Do you think that this is a possibility? Well,
I guess the president himself, when he used the word pivot, the pivot in policy towards Asia, gave great credence to that belief that we were somehow ready to abandon the Middle East. You cannot abandon the Middle East. The frustrations are there in dealing with the various issues. They're terribly complex, no question, and there are big issues to deal with in East Asia. But as things developed in the year since he initially made that comment about turning greater attention to East Asia, the Middle East flared up and he was pulled right back in, trying to decide what was in American interest, in the interest of our allies, and trying to devise a policy that that would cope with it. So I don't see that we are abandoning the area. If we pay more attention to Asia, Asia's interest in the Middle East is there, is strong as the market for the Saudi oil, the Gulf oil in the future, even more than it has been in the recent past. So the two areas are tied together in our interests, not to mention the security of Israel. Our interest in that remains, and that will keep us anchored in the area.
Well, let's just step back for a moment and take a look at the nuts and bolts of the relationship. Saudi Arabia has taken special care to invest its oil income in the United States. The kingdom holds hundreds of billions of dollars in U.S. Treasury bonds. It also buys the bulk of its military equipment from the United States. The latest deal, posted on the Pentagon's website just a few weeks ago, is worth $7 billion. And of course, American oil and construction contractors have a massive presence in the kingdom. Given all of this, it would appear that the relationship is profitable to both. But some still argue, Greg Gores, that Saudi Arabia needs the U.S. more than it needs Saudi Arabia. Your view?
I think there's still a mutual interest here. I certainly understand Hussein's position that it looks like the U.S. is departing the region. But I think that we have to take it in the context of what we've seen in the last decade. U.S. involvement in the region in the post 9/11 period was driven to an enormously high level. Wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, an American military occupation of an Arab country. Hussein's right that the United States is drawing back from that intense, historically high level of involvement. But I don't think that we're drawing completely away from the region. I think we're drawing back to what I would call a pre-9/11 approach to the Middle East, which is that it's an important strategic area. The United States has military and economic interests, especially in the Gulf region, but we're just not going to get involved in local wars the way we did in the post 9/11 period.
Well, to what extent? We've spoken about the US's thinking and all of this, but Hussein Sheboxi, to what extent is there an element here as well of Saudi Arabia positioning itself as the dominant power in the region, particularly in the wake of the Arab Spring, the downfall of the Mubarak regime, the pressure on the Assad government, the apparent lessening of Turkey's influence within the region? Is there an element of Saudi Arabia stepping up to assert its authority?
Absolutely. There is a great vacuum that was created by the downfall of the Iraqi political system. The same is true in Syria, and the same is true in Egypt. So this huge vacuum, basically the only fitting candidate to take over the leadership position in this part of the world were the Saudis. But I just want to comment on what Greg said a few minutes ago, that we did live through an historical moment last month when both parliaments in Britain and the United States were engaged in different roles vis-a-vis the strike on Syria. This is unprecedented. The decisions in the past, we saw this with the Marines landing in Lebanon twice, getting involved in the Suez Canal. The Middle East, even before September the 11th, was an important part of the policy and the military decision-making process in the United States. It is no longer the case, unfortunately. That was a historical moment that should not be taken for granted.
Well, Ambassador Murphy, your view on that somehow this historical moment has not been taken full cognizance of, the fact that the US has had a historical role within the Middle East region for decades.
That role will continue. What I heard in Prince Banda's words was also, on their part, a frustration of being too dependent on American policy, waiting, hoping that we would move in a certain direction, and then very upset when we don't move as far as fast as they would like. But I think the role will continue. It will be it will be less in terms of military involvement than certainly it was at the time of going into Iraq. I think Iraq will go down in American thinking as the time that America hit the wall and discovered that its military might, its money, were not enough to transform that society and other societies. So there's more acceptance of a more modest role in the region than was the case in the first years of the 21st century.
Well, Greg Gores, I want to return to something that we mentioned a little bit earlier, and that is the Israeli-Palestinian track. We've mentioned Saudi frustration. To what extent do you believe that that frustration also has to do with a U.S. apparent inability to drive home some kind of agreement in that region, particularly given the fact that a Saudi plan has been gathering dust in a drawer for a long period of time at this stage?
Well, I think Hussein was exactly right when he said that in effect, the Arab-Israeli situation and the Palestinian-Israeli situation is a constant in relations between the U.S. and the Saudis. The U.S. really hasn't moved aggressively on Israeli-Palestinian issues since the Clinton administration, and even there it was a failure to achieve peace between Syria and Israel and the Palestinians in Israel. And I share Hussein's view that the longer the situation continues its status quo, the less and less likely a two-state solution is. But I think that frustration on the part of the Saudis and the Arab world in general is not something new. It's not something that would have created a crisis in the relationship now. I think that the new things that are driving this particular instance of differences of opinion are less the constant of differences on Arab-Israeli questions and more the new issues of Syria and Egypt.
Ambassador Murphy, your view on that, is this a culmination of newer issues rather than that decades-old crisis between the Israelis and Palestinians?
The Saudis tried their own hand at mediation of the Palestinian rivals between Hamas and Fatah. Mecca agreement of a few years ago was very quickly broken, dishonored by the participants. The Saudis hoped for an agreement to bring the Palestinians together. Didn't work out. They're very much aware of the complexities of the Arab-Israeli situation. Proud of what they did at the Beirut summit back in 2002 and launching that plan to find a formula on which the Arab world could unite to accept the existence of Israel, and disappointed, not totally surprised, but certainly disappointed that that did not get American support, did not get Israeli support, and that it has been left just hanging there for the past dozen years. I think that when we say Saudi concerns about Syria, though, it does take us back to Iran. The Saudis concern that Iran is aiming at a role of hegemony in the area. They feel as uneasy and hostile towards that development as do the Israelis.
Well, one final word from Hussein Shaboxi and a very simple question. Is this a mere spat, as we said, a mere argument between close partners, or is it something far deeper?
No, it is a serious argument. It's a discussion that is blunt and needed, healthy and required, because for the longest time this relationship between Saudi Arabia and America was one based on hypocrisy, frankly. And it is about time that a peoples to peoples and a government to government complete transparent exchange take place. It will be healthier for both of them.
Well, at that particular point, my thanks to my guests, Richard Murphy, Hussein Shaboxi, and Greg Gores. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.